All right, everybody, welcome and good morning to Friday's fun form class with Joe.
Good morning.
I think most of you guys were here last time we talked about the 35, which is the inspection addendum that is attached in a purchase and sale. It's a form we hadn't used a lot of up until recent, and now we're seeing that again. So if you guys have any questions on the 35, we will be referencing the 35 a little bit on this, as this is the preceding form to the 35. And so when we're doing a 35, if we're representing our sellers, we're giving permission to the buyer to come and do an inspection on the home. If we're working with our buyers, we are representing them to have an inspection done on the home to find out the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's nothing to be feared if you receive one just because you haven't seen it before. It's a standard part of practice. It's like when you go buy a car, oftentimes you'll go have a private inspection done on the car to make sure you're not buying a lemon. It's the same with the house when time warrants. If we can get our buyers into the house to look under the hood, it's really good. We also get to what's called site control, meaning like once we represent a buyer and our contract's accepted with the inspection contingency, as long as we're within our timeline, they cannot take the home away from us. We could essentially ask them to rebuild the whole home, which they're obviously going to say no. And when they say no, it doesn't mean that they can sell the house to somebody else because they're so offended. It means they don't have to do anything, but we can still accept the house as is. And so very extreme example, but I think sometimes the extremes help us to kind of understand the simplicity of these forms. So let's take a peek real quick. I'm going to share my screen. Do you guys have any questions at this point?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay, so first off, I want to direct you guys. So this is the MLS's website, right? Are you guys familiar with the Express Forms page?
I
No,
don't use that express
no,
forms.
not very familiar with it.
Okay, so let's go to a page you're familiar with. You guys are all familiar with this, correct?
Correct.
So all we have to do is go to MLS Home, which is when you first log in, it takes you to anyway. So if you go to MLS Home, they've got these menu bars up here. And so if you go to Express Forms, this is really convenient. You guys can study any form you want, but on the left column, it tells you exactly what form it is. And you can pull it up and it'll show you a copy of the form, which I've already done and we're going to look at. But what I also love is if you need clarification on a form or what a line means, right next to it. So we're looking at the 35R. There's also a manual, and I'm going to show you that because I pulled them both up, but you guys can study all the forms that you want to right there. And most questions are answered. I went ahead and went through. So first, let's look at what the 35R is. Okay. Have you guys used a 35R before?
Yep, I have.
Yes.
I don't know why they make this so dang big, but okay. So the first section is if we're representing a buyer, this is what we're filling out on their behalf after we have done the inspection. And so we have four options, if you remember. The first is, hey, we love this house. Everything's perfect. We just want to move to closing. Boom, you check the first box. That's the one everybody hopes for, but it's very, very, very rarely ever checked. The second is also the one that we really hope does not happen if we're representing a seller and even the buyer, because the buyers put money into having an inspection because they like the house enough. But if the house comes back with way too much money for them to fix, and they just say, hey, we don't want this house, they can check this box. They're out of the contract, no big deal. They're out of the contract, sorry, I'm letting Ashley in. But they're out of the contract, no big deal. The earnest money gets refunded. There's no discussion about it. It's just procedure and it's a right. But most often, one of the next two boxes are going to be checked. The second is buyer gives notice of additional inspection. The inspector's recommendation is attached. The time for buyer's response to the initial and additional inspection is extended as provided in paragraph 5 of Form 35. So if you remember when we were going over Form 35 last week, that isn't, we don't ask permission, it's a right. If something serious gets called out on the inspection and the inspector says, hey, you need to have an actual specialist come inspect this, like what we're doing right now on one of our listings, then we don't, the seller can't say no. They may not like it, it's going to cause concern, but they can't say no. Or what's most commonly is going to be this box, box 4. And it says buyer requests the following modifications and or repairs described below or on the attached pages. If seller agrees to these modifications or repairs, the inspection contingency shall be deemed satisfied. If buyer provides any portion of the inspection report to the seller without seller's prior written consent, or as required by paragraph 5, the inspection contingency shall conclusively be deemed waived. What does that mean? And that sounds scary. It's quite simple. And it's we talked about it on the 35. And when we start reading through the manual, like I told you, and I highlighted it, there is a lot of places where they're going to make explicit warnings that the buyer is not to provide the seller with any portion or the entire inspection report without written consent. Now, on the 35, when they submit it with the offer, the seller might say, hey, I want to see the inspection. So there is a box on there that they can check requesting a portion or the whole. But if that's not checked and there is no thing, and you all of a sudden just get a copy of the inspection report, they're in complete violation. The sellers have no obligation to make any repairs because now they've waived their right for the inspection report. And if the buyer decides to walk away, the seller gets to retain the earnest money. And that went into effect probably about a year ago. And, in the old school way, we take copies of pieces of the inspection report and attach that to our request. Well, that's a real inconvenience because maybe it's not even a material defect, but all of a sudden they put that in the buyer's hand, or in the seller's head. And now the seller has to, if it's a material defect, they have to make changes to the Form 17 and disclose it. And so this really is a very important thing to pay attention to, as it has a direct implications both to buyers and sellers. So, okay. So let's say, because the one, sometimes, do you guys think you could ever use a 35R more than once on a transaction, or is it one form per transaction? What do you guys think? It's a trick question.
One form per transaction.
No, in fact, so if we check this box, and so this is something I got clarity with. I talked to the MLS yesterday because the rules have changed so much. But if they check this box, we don't request a portion of the inspection report. They are entitled to send that portion of the inspection report. And so if we want to look through the manual here, I highlighted some really important things. And Chris and Ashley, I don't think you were on yet. And so I'm just going to draw your attention to this in case you didn't see it. Are you familiar with the express forms in the MLS?
Yeah.
Okay. And are you aware that every form is on the left and on the right is a manual of what that form, how to fill that form out? Okay. So what,
but yeah,
there's a lot of great information in there.
Yeah.
They really break it down in plain English. And so that's what this is. And I just highlighted some sections that I thought were important. But if you go to the manual, it'll literally spell it out. And then it literally takes every section on it and tells you what it means. And then they attach a copy at the end of the form labeled. So you can actually do a lot of research. If you can't get a hold of somebody or you're just confused, I'd encourage you to familiarize yourself.
I had no idea that was there.
that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's why we sound so smart sometimes, because we go look at it, because there is no way I could keep up with every form and all the changes all the time. So, we've got to always kind of re-educate ourselves. So let's go over the manual, because this is where all the questions will probably be answered. But it says we use this form. Oh, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I highlighted, do not use this form representing an offer. Instead, use this form once the buyer has completed an inspection of the property and wants to give notice of approval, disapproval, or enter into negotiations to modify the agreement. And so that's check box 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then it says part of the agreement. So again, we're not submitting the offer with the 35R. It's a response to the 35. And so that's important to know. And so, sorry, I'm letting Shree in. I lost my chain of thought. Okay, so if buyer asks for modifications to the property or the agreement as a result of the inspection process, then we use Form 35 and it becomes a part of the agreement, even though all parties may not agree to the change on the Form 35R or agree to buyer's request at all. Again, what's cool about this, if there's two buyers and two sellers, this is a form that only one of each party has to sign off on. Also, it's still best practice to get all people signed, because I do know if somebody signed for me, I might be a little irritated. So it's still best practice. But if you're in a situation where you just have to get an initial, one person should suffice. So again, the Form 35, it becomes a part of the agreement, even if I submit a request to make repairs to Cindy and Cindy doesn't agree, it's okay. The 35R is still part of the contract. So what's important to know is that this form sets forth very complex procedures. We're negotiating. So this is another time of negotiation. And if you remember from last week, what are the things that we can ask for on an inspection response? We can't get cash back, but what could we do? Cindy, can you name one thing that we can do as a response?
Oh, to the inspection?
Yeah, if you're the seller, how can we respond to the inspection? Can we give them cash?
No,
Okay.
we could give them money off the house, or we could fix it.
Yep. And another option is, and the one that's used a lot is the sellers agreed to apply money towards closing costs. And that's a real easy objection. I just say, hey, Cindy, we want to help you out, but we want to expedite closing. So, and also I'm sure you have your own contractor that you'd like to use once it's closed. So why don't we just help out with closing costs so you can keep money in your pocket to have the necessary repairs after closing. So that's one of the ways to negotiate that. But here's the answer to that question: multiple forms. It is possible that you will use more than one Form 35R in a transaction. For example, it is possible to use one Form 35R to give notice of an additional inspection and then use a new 35R to propose modifications to the agreement. And so we just got served yesterday with the request to do an additional inspection on the sewer line. And so they are going to respond again with that. They're going to also respond to the sewer line with an additional request for work to be completed. So we'll see 2 on that transaction. Oh, hold on.
Where is that where you do that on the 35R?
You would just submit another 35R with your response.
Oh, you just do a new one. Okay.
Yeah. So the timeline still applies. So we want to make sure that we're in time compliance. So it's 3 days for additional inspections. So then I would just submit, upon that completion, I would say the buyer and seller agreed to repair the main line and fixing it, whatever the case is, but then you're just approaching it like anything else. So what we're really, I like your guys' name, Crashly. I just noticed that. Oh, cute.
Mhm.
Sorry. So yeah, that's how you would use that. Again, these are very important forms, but let's not when we go to do it, we just need to slow down and talk to the sellers and the buyers, whoever we're representing, to let them know that this is just a form of communication. Don't let it overwhelm you. So here we go. We're going to talk about the inspection report. So paragraph 4 in the inspection addendum, Form 35, provides that buyer shall not provide the inspection report or portions of the report to the seller without seller's prior written consent, or as required by paragraph 5, additional time for inspection. Seller can request a copy of the inspection report or portions of the inspection report related to the buyer's requested repairs or modifications by checking the application box on paragraph 4B. So I'll show you that. So here's the inspection report that we talked about last week. And so here we go. We got all our timelines here, but right here, when they submit that, you can respond, and it's not a counter. This is what's really important to know. We're taught that anytime we change an original contract, it's a counter, but not on this form. If you get an offer accepted, and I don't know why you'd ever check this box initially, but I just want you to know there might come a time where they send it over and you say, sure, we're going to let you do your inspection, but we want a copy of the report. So you check it. I would still have my clients initial it just because, we're changing that, but it doesn't change. But it doesn't actually change the contract at all. It's not a counter. So they don't have to initial back. It's just an acknowledgement. Does that make sense?
Do you take that form and then the original form and then just check that and send it back? Just that form?
Yeah, and because it's a new add-on, when they made the changes to this form, I would also just alert the agent, hey, my sellers have requested an inspection report on the 35. So that's what I would do, and maybe even just follow up with a call. Again, I don't know why. I can't think of a situation off the top of my head where I would just want an inspection report given to me. That's a scary thing. And that's a whole nother conversation we can talk about. But again, it is their right and they can request that, and some might want to. If you get a whole but to me, the most common time that will come up is once you've submitted your 35R asking for me to make all these repairs, and I'm at the house saying these things aren't broken, then I might want to see the report to make sure that you're not just trying to get over on me.
Right.
Right.
But those are like the technicalities of how to work with it. And those are all probably phone calls for Chris, for myself, that we could, situationally walk through together. But just know that that is a right, and it could be something that someone requests.
Yeah, and I always like to, for my buyers at least, I would rather them just get a credit, because I
Yeah.
don't know what those repairs are going to turn out like.
Yeah, oftentimes we have contractors that can do the work cheaper. But yeah,
Right.
if it's my house, I don't want you to just pick some contractor that,
Right.
you found on Craigslist and tell me the job's complete, because who knows? So that's always
Yep.
probably the way to protect your buyers the most. And it just expedites things. So here again, so I told you they warn us several times. Here again is that warning. If the buyer provides any portion of the inspection report to the seller without seller's prior written consent, or as required by paragraph 5, additional time for inspections, and we'll look at that in a sec, the inspection contingency shall be deemed waived. So what that means is I get my inspection done and I need all this work done. So I'm going to send my request for repairs to Cindy, and I'm going to attach that inspection report. What I just did is I waived my buyer's ability to negotiate. Now the buyers are obligated to buy the house as is. The sellers have zero obligation to make any repairs or come to any terms. So when the buyer gets really pissed off and walks away, they're going to walk away without their earnest money. So it's very important that we understand that we never, ever, ever send it when we're asking for repairs to be made. But the one time we do send a portion of it is right here. They keep referring to paragraph 5. So let's take a look at it. Paragraph 5. So this happens once the inspector's been at the house. If an inspector so recommends, buyer shall have additional time to obtain further evaluation of any items by a specialist at buyer's option and expense, if on or before the end of the initial inspection period. So again, you do your inspection, it's 5 days. You have to have your response back within that time period. If it's 3 days, you have to have your response in 3 days. So that's very important that the time is paid attention to. The buyer will provide buyer provides seller a copy of the inspector's recommendation and notice that buyer will seek additional inspections. If buyer gives timely notice of additional inspection, buyer shall have blank, and oftentimes we change that to 2 or 3 days, 5 days, if not filled in, after giving notice to obtain the inspections as recommended by the inspector. And so yesterday, Jason and I share clients, and so sometimes I get some emails where I'm not interacting in, and I got a copy of the inspection report, and I was like, what on earth? But I didn't realize that they were attaching it, requesting for additional inspection. So they were fully within their right. So let's go back to 35R right here. Our options. So the only time we can then attach the inspection report is when we're checking this box, and we don't do the whole report. We just do the section where the inspector calls it out. And then you'd have the 3 additional days. At the end of that time, if they want to negotiate more, they would bring out a new 35R, and they would say buyers is dissatisfied if they're walking away because the additional inspection realized it was too big. Or in our case, they're checking this box and they're asking for some modifications to be made. But that's the one time that it's okay for them to go ahead and sign that. And so again, what I want to draw your attention to, this is a notice which requires only one buyer's or one seller's signature. So when you're representing like a couple, and oftentimes one of them is going to be your primary contact and easy to get a hold of, that's all you need is a signature for that. Now, I never actually realized that until I started reading the forms a lot more careful, because I think it's best practice to always include all parties. So this is not a notice and requires all buyers or sellers. This is not a notice and requires all buyers or sellers' signatures. So down here, when it's time to sign, let's see here. Only one of the buyers. Okay, sorry. This is not a notice and requires all buyers or sellers' signature. Oh, that's kind of contradictive, isn't it? This notice requires only one buyer. Okay, let's find where the asterisks are. Okay, so where these asterisks are, if they check box 1, box 2, In box 3, they only need one person. Box 4, if it's going to require money and negotiation of the contract, that's how you think of it. It's got the 2 asterisks. So box 4 is going to require all parties to sign. Box 1 through 3 only requires one person on each side to sign. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Again, guys, I can't stress enough how convenient these forms are to go to the act. If you have any questions, it literally will break it down like, okay, what do I do for seller? Insert the
I
seller's
love
name
that.
on the purchase and sale contract. So it's sometimes I sound really smart, but all I've done is read these forms.
I wish I'd have known that before. You know how many times I could have used that?
I just assumed people knew, so I'm glad I brought that up.
Yeah.
So the takeaways on this is what's most important to me is this becomes part of the contract, but it's not included in the original contract. This is how we respond when we have an inspection. Do not send in the inspection report without written requests or written requests from the seller. Otherwise, you're putting your buyers in harm's way. If you're representing a seller, know that. So if you get that, you're off the hook to make any inspection, repairs, and you can just move forward to closing. And if the buyers do decide to walk, well, they're forfeiting their earnest money to do so. So it's really important that we pay attention to. Oh, another thing, all timelines, whether it's this form or not, let's say the inspection was due in 5 days. Like when I inspected my house, I had a 5-day inspection. I didn't want any work to be done and I was really busy and I didn't want to bother the sellers. So I just didn't even respond in a form, because if I don't respond and I let that time period expire, then it's considered waived. So by me not submitting a form over to them, I was waiving my right to ask for any modifications to be made. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So if it's 5 days and on day 6 you ask for all this work to be done, sorry, you're out of time period. There's no negotiation anymore. So I think those are the most important things to remember on this is watch your time periods, slow down, and just kind of know what we're trying to do here. Anybody have any questions?
No, that was really awesome. I'm gonna use that more often.
Okay. Oh, I didn't actually complete it. There's another section to the form, isn't there? So let's go right back to sharing screen. So this is how it's going to play out most of the time. They're going to usually check this box, and it's going to, I would say something like both buyer and seller agree to fix loose toilet. Sometimes things are complicated. We need additional forms, but I'm trying to keep it simple so we understand this form. So, we want to fix the toilet. What's something else? Replace broken screens or broken window. Both buyer and seller. I always put both buyer and seller agree because that's how I was taught to fix screens in bedrooms on main floor. You want to be specific, so on main
So
floor.
what if the seller hasn't agreed? You just put that in there anyways?
Well, I'm sending this over after I've done the inspection. I don't know how they're going to respond.
Right.
In this
Oh, I
case, they're
see.
probably going to say okay because it's small. So that's just the first portion.
Stating
of
the
it.
terms.
Yep.
It's more stating the terms, and then see if they agree. And then if they agree to that, then they'll sign.
Exactly. And so once I've submitted that over, now it's part of the contract, even though they haven't agreed to it. So now they have to respond in a timely fashion too. And their choices are the seller agrees to all modifications or repairs and buyer's request. This inspection contingency is satisfied. The parties agree to proceed to closing as provided in the agreement, and buyer's reply below is not necessary. So if the seller agrees to fix those things, they just check this box and they sign it and we're done. We move on to closing. The satisfaction has been made. Or maybe they'll say, hey, you know what? We're not going to, we'll fix the toilet, but we're not going to do the screens. Boom, sends it back over. If that's the case, now the buyer has to either accept their response, reject their response. And if they reject their response, again, they get their earnest money back.
Mhm.
Or they can offer an alternative response like, well, we would like $500 so we could replace the screens then, and on that case, you would bust out a form 34 because we've run out of room and put it on there. So, and so that's how you respond. Now, if the seller rejects all proposals by buyer, they say, this is ludicrous. We're selling it as is. We're not going to fix that toilet or the screens. It works just fine. Now the buyer has a choice to make. They can say, pound sand, we're walking away, give us our money back. Or they can say, you know what, we're tired of dealing with it. We'll get it handled once we get closed, and they can accept it. Or they can also respond accordingly, like, okay, we want the screens, but we'll take a $500 credit so we can get a new toilet. And so once those terms are all agreed upon, this has been satisfied, and we're either moving to closing or we're withdrawing from the deal, and the sellers are bringing the house back to the market. And that is all the sections of the Form 35R.
Cool.
But just slow down and pay attention to your timelines on there. Use your timelines. Honestly, this is where, if we're representing our buyer, we have site control. So things to think about are, when we get into the strategy of how to use this form, is, let's say that we forgot our inspection done on Monday, but we have until next Monday to respond. I mean, the sellers would love it if we'd respond, and so they could either come back to market but we've got this, we've locked this down. The longer it's off the market, the more concern that the sellers are going to have, or maybe not even concern, the more they're already planning on their next move and they're excited. So oftentimes, if we use these timelines to stretch it out, negotiation becomes a little bit easier because they want to work with somebody. Nobody wants to bring a home back to market. Everybody wants to figure out how to make it work, unless there's just somebody waiting in the wings with an amazing offer, and then they're just hoping you go away.
Especially after inspection, because then you have to start doing some splaining.
Exactly.
Right.
So, yeah. And so a good agent that is representing the seller and is waiting on the inspection response is probably going to be proactive and be like, hey, Chris, did you find anything? What's going on? And Chris is going to say, hey, thanks for your reaching out. We'll respond appropriately in the time allotted. We have until Monday, so we're going to think about it, and you will have a response. It's okay to slow walk it. Know your rights. Know your rights of your seller or of your buyer. That way, you're not getting pressured by the other agents. If you know your rights and you work within the rights, it doesn't matter if the agent gets anxious. Anybody's anxious when their house is off the market. You take one of Chris's houses off the market, Ashley, Cindy's for 2 days, everybody's anxious.
Yep.
And all of a sudden people are calling and you're full of regret. Like, should we have accepted that offer? So use your site control to your advantage.
Yeah.
If expediting it makes sense to get favor with them, know that. But this is a point of negotiation. This is where we feel out the sellers. This is where we feel out our buyers. This is where we fill out the agent on the other end, so we know how best to proceed. So a couple more takeaways is know where you can study those forms, because it's in plain English and very simple most of the time. And so a lot of the times with the 2-minute due diligence, you can just look that form up and find out the question that you have.